moving forward, I would now like to request Honorable President, South Asian Federation of Accountants, Mr. Hanaike Bandara, to have his keynote speech. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you again for your introduction. Mr. Nihar Jambusari, Vice President of SAFA, who will be joining with us shortly. Mr. Rahman, Chairman, AML Committee of SAFA. Eminent speakers, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me thank the Chairman, members, and Secretary of the AML Committee for organizing this webinar within a very short period and inviting me to deliver the keynote speech about anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism. I also would like to thank Mr. Yusuf Tola, President IC Pakistan, for the support extended to organize this awareness session for the benefit of the accounting fraternity in the South Asian region. It is a true pleasure for me to be here on behalf of SAFA, and I am delighted to address you all on the subject matter, as I too have involved with regulators in implementing laws and regulations when I was the compliance officer as well as the general manager CEO of the largest savings bank in Sri Lanka. All of you would agree that the subject as formulated is far too wide for fair coverage within the limited time allotted. I therefore will confine my remarks to provide the overall view of the subject area. First, let us consider international effort in strengthening the AML CFT framework. In response to the growing concerns about money laundering and terrorist financing activities, the international community has acted on many fronts. The international effort began with the recognition that drug trafficking was an international issue and could only be addressed effectively on a multilateral basis. Thus, the first international convention concerning money laundering has had drug trafficking as the only predicate offense. However, with growing international concerns, most countries now include a wide range of offenses as money laundering predicate offenses. Thereafter, several international organizations have taken many initiatives to strengthen the global AML CFT framework. The United Nations, UN, was the first international organization to undertake significant action to fight against money laundering on a worldwide basis. The role played by the UN is important as it has the ability to adopt international treaties or conventions that have the effect of a law in a country once that country has signed, ratified, and implemented the convention depending on the country's constitution and legal structure. Several conventions and resolutions adopted by the UN are of importance in combating money laundering and terrorist financing in the world. In response to mounting concern over money laundering, the Financial Action Task Force on Money Laundering, FATF, was established by the G7 summit held in Paris in 1989, recognizing the threat posed to the banking system and to financial institutions. The G7 heads of states and President of the European Commission convened the task force from G7 member states, the European Commission, and 8 other countries. The Financial Action Task Force is an intergovernmental body whose purpose is the development and promotion of policies both at national and international levels to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. The task force is therefore a policy-making body which works to generate the necessary political will to bring about national legislative and regulatory reforms in these areas. In 1990, the FATF issued a report containing a set of 40 recommendations which provides a comprehensive plan of action needed to fight against money laundering. In 2001, the development of standards in the fight against terrorist financing was added to the mission of the FATF. In October 2001, the FATF issued 8 special recommendations to deal with the issue of terrorist financing. The continued evolution of money laundering techniques led the FATF to revise the FATF standards comprehensively in 2003. In 2004, the FATF published a 9th special recommendation, further strengthening the agreed international standards for countering the financing of terrorism. These 40 plus 9 recommendations set out international standards for anti-money laundering measures and combating the financing of terrorism and terrorist acts. They also set out the principles for action and allow countries a measure of flexibility in implementing these principles according to their particular circumstances and constitutional framework. FATF recommendations are therefore intended to be implemented at the national level through legislation and other legally binding measures. The standards were revised from time to time considering the new developments. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to unprecedented global challenges, human suffering, and economic disruption. Criminals have been quick to seek ways to exploit this crisis despite the exceptional circumstances. The FATF has continued advancing its important work. It has highlighted COVID-19 related threats and vulnerabilities as well as policy responses to address them. In the case of virtual assets, FATF has issued global binding standards to prevent the misuse of virtual assets for money laundering and terrorist financing. The standards ensure that virtual assets are treated fairly, applying the same safeguards as the financial sector. Apart from that, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision has formulated 3 supervisory standards and guidelines concerning money laundering issue. 1, the Statement of Principles of Money Laundering outline the basic policies and procedures that bank management should ensure that are in place within their institution to assist in suppressing money laundering through the banking system. 2, the core principles for banking, which provides a comprehensive blueprint for an effective bank supervisory system covering wide topics, including KYC and customer due diligence policies. 3, extensive paper on KYC principles. Other than such institutions, International Association of Insurance Supervisors and International Organization of Securities Commissioners have also contributed to the global effort in combating money laundering and terrorist financing. More importantly, establishment of regional monitoring bodies play a crucial role in the fight against money laundering and terrorism financing through monitoring, implementation, and enforcement of FATF recommendation. They also administer mutual evaluation of their members which are intended to identify weaknesses so that members may take remedial action. They also provide information to their members about trends, techniques, and other developments in the field of money laundering and terrorist financing. Regional bodies are voluntary and cooperative organizations which are being organized based on geographical region. Currently, the FATF has recognized several regional bodies. Let me now talk about the position of Sri Lanka, in other words, about my country. Sri Lanka is a member of the Asia Pacific Group on money laundering, and therefore compliance with the FATF recommendation is being monitored by them. Sri Lanka has given a serious recognition to the need for preventing money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism in view of their adverse consequences, both economic and social. The country has, in fact, been a victim of terrorism financing and suffered immensely by its consequences. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka has a special concern on money laundering and terrorism financing, as it has a mandate to maintain the stability of the financial system. Therefore, even before the enactment of the necessary laws, safeguards to insulate the financial system from money laundering and terrorism financing were placed through the available laws at the disposal of the central bank, such as Exchange Control Act, Customs Ordinance, and Banking Act. Adequate reporting requirements were imposed to monitor large cross-border flows of currencies, and as far back as in 2001, Know Your Customer KYC guidelines were issued to all banks, urging adherence when dealing with clients and counterparties. The necessary legislation was introduced as early as in 2005 and 2006 by enacting 3 laws, namely the Convention on the Suppression of Terrorist Financing Act, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, and the Financial Transaction Reporting Act, under which the FIU, with regulatory powers and a mandate to formulate policies and guidelines in line with the international standards and recommendations. In October 2016, the FATF announced that Sri Lanka would be subject to a review of International Cooperation Review Group of the FATF to assess the progress of AML-CFT effectiveness in the country. After several discussions and progress reports, they indicated that Sri Lanka has not made sufficient progress in certain areas. In fact, they identified the 4 main areas. As a result, in October 2017, Sri Lanka was included in the grey list of FATF. The year 2019 was a very successful year in strengthening the AML-CFT regime of the country. One of the main tasks of the Financial Intelligence Unit of Sri Lanka was to complete the FATF action plan to delist Sri Lanka from the grey list with the support of all the stakeholders. Central Bank of Sri Lanka's coordinated efforts were finally endorsed by delisting Sri Lanka from the FATF grey list. Going forward, in 2021, FIU slammed penalties on leading commercial banks and licensed finance companies for non-compliance. So these are status of the Sri Lanka. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I wish to state that professionals are the backbone of a country's forward march, and while concentrating the AML and combating terrorism financing, you need to help the anti-corruption program of your country as well, even though it can ever be eliminated, but at least to reduce it to the extent possible. Therefore, the challenge today is not the inadequacy of standards. The challenge is the commitment and implementation of recommendation. In short, effective and efficient action by all stakeholders to stop money laundering, to reduce the harm caused by crime and terrorism. I wish the seminar all success. Thank you all. Over to you, Mr. Ram.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.